हाय एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। सो जैसे कि आप जानते हैं हम लोग पॉलिटिकल थियरी सीरीज कर रहे थे। सो आज का हमारा टॉपिक रहने वाला है वेलफेयर स्टेट पर। सो विदाउट एनी फर्दर डू लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। सो फ्रेंड, जब हम बात करते हैं वेलफेयर स्टेट की, तो वेलफेयर स्टेट के बारे में आज की डेट में हर एक स्टेट ये मानता है कि उनका स्टेट वेलफेयर स्टेट है, राइट। सो अब बात उठती है वेलफेयर स्टेट से आप क्या समझते हैं। देखिए, वेलफेयर स्टेट में एक ऐसे सिस्टम की बात की जाती है जिसमें ज़्यादातर लोगों को ज़्यादातर फैसिलिटीज़ मिली जाती हैं, वो भी गवर्नमेंट फैसिलिटीज़। ओके, सो जब कोई भी देश अपने सिटीजन्स की भलाई के लिए कदम उठाते हैं, उनकी फैसिलिटीज़ के लिए, उनकी वेल्थ के लिए जब कोई काम करते हैं, तो उन देशों को क्या माना जाता है? वेलफेयर स्टेट। सो वेलफेयर स्टेट का जो स्ट्रक्चर होता है वो सोशल डेवलपमेंट पर बेस्ड होता है। अब हमारे सामने एक क्वेश्चन होता है, क्या इंडिया वेलफेयर स्टेट है? अगर है तो किस लेवल पर है और क्या क्या चेंजेस उसमें किए जाने चाहिए? देखिए, जब हम बात करते हैं डेवलपमेंट की, तो डेवलपमेंट के लिए सबसे ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट क्या है? एजुकेशन। और एक वेलफेयर स्टेट बनने के लिए एजुकेशन पर सबसे ज़्यादा ध्यान दिया जाना चाहिए। बट क्या ऐसा आज की डेट में हो रहा है? बट अब आप देख सकते हो कि किस तरीके से एजुकेशन से ऊपर लोग आजकल रिलीजन को इम्पोर्टेंस देते हैं, राइट। इसका एक करंट एग्जांपल ले लेते हैं। रिसेंटली आपने देखा होगा हिजाब को लेकर किस तरीके से कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हो रहे हैं हमारे देश में। सो इसमें आपने देखा होगा कि किस तरीके से कुछ स्टूडेंट्स का क्या मानना है कि उन्हें हिजाब पहनने दिया जाए स्कूल में। क्या ये सही है? और अगर सही है तो क्यों है? और अगर सही नहीं है तो वो भी क्यों है? अगर आपको ये सही लगता है, उसके फैक्ट्स के साथ आप मुझे कमेंट्स में ज़रूर बताएं। अभी हम जानते हैं कि किस तरीके से सही नहीं है, क्योंकि मेरे अकॉर्डिंग ये बिल्कुल गलत है। जब हम स्कूल जाते हैं, स्कूल में एक यूनिफॉर्म होती है। यूनिफॉर्म स्कूल में क्यों होती है? आपको इसका रीज़न पता होना चाहिए। ये होती है इक्वालिटी। इक्वालिटी के लिए ये चीज़ें होती है ताकि हर बच्चा इक्वल लगे और किसी के भी साथ किसी भी तरीके का भेदभाव ना हो, किसी भी रिलीजन, कास्ट, क्लास, किसी भी तरीके का ना हो। इसलिए क्या होती है? यूनिफॉर्म होती है स्कूल्स में। तो अब ये किस तरीके से सही है कि जब आप कुछ स्टूडेंट ये डिमांड करते हैं कि हमें हिजाब में आने दिया जाए, आप क्यों आगे बढ़ने से डरते हैं? तो इस मेंटालिटी के पीछे रीज़न क्या है, वही हमें सबसे पहले ढूंढना है। इसलिए स्कूल्स में यूनिफॉर्म होती है जिससे हर बच्चा इक्वल लगे और हर बच्चा अपना सेल्फ डेवलपमेंट कर सके, चाहे वो किसी भी कास्ट का हो, किसी भी धर्म का हो। ओके, अब हम कुछ डेफिनेशंस देखेंगे वेलफेयर स्टेट की। देखिए, सबसे पहले TW कैंट के अकॉर्डिंग वेलफेयर स्टेट वो स्टेट होते हैं जो अपने सिटीजन्स को सोशल सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कराते हैं। प्रोफेसर लास्की के अकॉर्डिंग वेलफेयर स्टेट लोगों का वो ग्रुप होता है जिसमें कि सबका भला होता है, ठीक है। इट इज समटाइम्स एक्सटेंडेड मोर लूजली टू एरियाज सच एज सोशल सिक्योरिटी इन विच इंडिविजुअल्स आर लीगली रिक्वायर्ड टू मेक सब्सटेंशियल contribution in order to receive the benefits. The theory of welfare state is the basis of positive liberalism. It is a sort of state which provides extensive social services to all the citizens, protects the weaker sections, provides economic and social security, and tries to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. It makes laws to control the economy, nationalizes industries, makes laws to protect the weaker sections, arranges the supply of essential commodities, maintains essential services, and through progressive taxation and income redistribution, tries to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor and thereby harmonizes the different interests in society. सो बेसिकली ये अमीर और गरीब के बीच के डिफरेंस को मिटाता है। अगर कोई भी स्टेट वेलफेयर स्टेट होता है तो यहाँ पे एसेंशियल ज़रूरतें सबकी पूरी होनी चाहिए, जो कि बहुत ही बेसिक होती है। सो जैसे कि मैंने आपको अभी बताया है कि गवर्नमेंट को सारी ऐसी फैसिलिटीज़ प्रोवाइड करवानी चाहिए। हेल्थ फैसिलिटी, एजुकेशन फैसिलिटी, हर चीज़ प्रोवाइड करानी चाहिए, वो भी फ्री ऑफ चार्ज। जो कि अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकते, अपने बच्चों को स्कूल भेजना अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकते, उनके लिए बहुत बेनिफिशियल ये चीज़ें होती हैं, तभी एक स्टेट को वेलफेयर स्टेट माना जाएगा, ठीक है। नाउ कम टू द नेक्स्ट टॉपिक विच इज़ इवोल्यूशन ऑफ पॉजिटिव liberalism. The latter half of the 19th century produced a critique of negative liberalism. The theories of non-interference were found to be inadequate to achieve the social and economic aims of liberalism. Okay, the laissez-faire policy was based on the premise that in the good of the individual lies the good of the society. Negative liberalism believed that the distribution of wealth into wage, profit, and rent was not unjustified. However, the latter half of the 19th century saw the rapid concentration of capital in a few hands. monopolistic control of trade, and emergence of big industrial houses which created many social, economic and political contradictions. It created a sense of frustration and protest among millions whose livelihood and very life depended upon their new masters, the impersonal corporations. Another factor which undermined faith in the laissez-faire was unemployment. When millions remained outside the workforce for years, men began to doubt whether the free trade economy, if left to its own laws and harmony, actually produced the maximum general good. In fact, the liberal slogan of liberty began to change into the privilege of the few. England, the report of the Royal Commission appointed to investigate the coal mining industry shocked everyone about the brutality that existed in the mines. The employment of women and children, barbarously long hours of work, the absence of safety, devices, and the prevalence of revolting conditions, both physical and moral. Right? A thoroughgoing revision of liberal theory required a re examination of the nature and functions of the state, the nature of liberty, and the relationship between liberty and authority, which is very important. Such a re examination also opened the question of the relationship between individual human nature and its relations with the society, because the old notions such as self interest, pleasure, and utility proved less convincing. This revision is known as positive liberalism and was carried out by J.S. Mill, T.H. Green, T.G. Rich in the 19th century, and Hobson, Hobhouse, Lindsay, G.D.H. Cole, Barger, Lasky in the 20th century. J.S. Mill's ideas of liberalism depart from those of the classical model in four ways. Firstly, he opined that the value of personality of the individual can be realized in the actual conditions of a free society. Secondly, he accepted political and social freedom as good in themselves. To live one's own life, developing one's own native traits and capacities is not only a means to happiness, but a substantive part of happiness itself. A good society is one which permits both freedom and opens up the opportunity for a free and satisfying way of life. Third party is not an individual good, but a social good. Okay. T.H. Green brought about an idealist revision of liberalism. He made it abundantly clear that liberalism could not be placed on narrow foundations. He inferred that at the center of liberal philosophy was the idea of general good or common human well being, which is capable of being shared by everyone and which provided a standard of legislation. This standard could not be individual liberty alone. Choice means opportunity, and opportunity means a society that is not coercive beyond need, either in its legal and political structure or in its economic and social structure. Freedom is really as much social as it is an individual conception. It refers at once to the quality of society and the quality of persons that make up the society. Green defined liberty as a positive power or capacity of doing or enjoying something worth doing, or enjoying freedom implies not only a legal but an actual possibility. Hence, it is impossible that a government should be liberal merely by standing aside and refraining from legislation, or that a liberal society should come into being merely by political inadvertence. The function of a liberal government is to support the existence of a free society, and it can remove many of the obstacles that may stand in the way of moral development, such as ignorance, lack of education, poverty, illiteracy, and unhealthy sanitary conditions. Green did not claim that legislation could itself promote moral goodness. Nevertheless, in many situations, legislative intervention alone could bring into existence conditions in which man could exercise freely their faculties of moral judgment, enlarging the area of positive freedom. Similarly, Bosanquet in his book The Philosophical Theory of the State rejected the negative concept of liberty and contended that the fundamental concept of a genuine and social philosophy must be based upon the idea that the assertion and maximization of self and individuality becomes possible and real in and through society. The end of the state lies in the ensuring conditions for good life. So, at the beginning of the 20th century, liberalism was concerned with several allied problems in the context of developing capitalism, namely to seek a theoretical justification for continued state action for the promotion of social welfare, to integrate socialism into the frame of liberalism. Okay, this was basically achieved by writers like Lasky, Kenneth Barker, etc. For example, Lasky wrote, "Liberty is the power of adding something to common life." ठीक है, कॉमन लाइफ में कुछ भी ऐड करने को क्या कहते हैं? लिबर्टी, अकॉर्डिंग टू लास्की, which means a contribution which can only be made. There are certain specific conditions that enable the individual to make the contribution, and the institutional obstacles are not in his way. Okay, do you get that what I'm trying to say? Now come to the next topic, which is liberal democratic welfare state. So positive liberalism in the 20th century came to be identified with the democratic welfare state. The welfare state involves a radical transformation of the 19th century capitalist laissez-faire state in respect of the scope of public policy, the character of state action, the basic assumptions concerning human nature, and the idea of social good. The welfare state attempted to reconcile the interest of the individual with that of the society in order the essentials of the capitalist system were preserved, while at the same time removing its ill effects. So, the object of the state is not only to maintain law, order and justice, but it is also part of the social process. So basically friends, यहाँ पे बात क्या हो रही है कि जब हम बात करते हैं किसी भी स्टेट की, तो ज़्यादातर ध्यान किस पे जा जाता है? लॉ मेंटेन करना, ठीक है, जस्टिस पे ध्यान देना, हर चीज़ पे। बट एक ये पार्ट भी होता है कि सोशल प्रोसेस पर भी ध्यान देना चाहिए। जब तक सोसाइटी अच्छे से नहीं रहेगी तब तक किसी चीज़ का कोई फ़ायदा नहीं है, राइट। सबकी एसेंशियल नीड्स जो है वो पूरी होनी चाहिए, जो कि बहुत ज़रूरी है किसी भी स्टेट के लिए, ठीक है। So the main principles of the welfare state are relatively very simple. First, the recognition that every member of the community, solely because he is a human being, is entitled to a minimum standard of living. Secondly, the welfare state is committed to a policy of economic stability, right, and progress, seeking to eliminate cycles of violent booms and bust in the economy by public policy. Whenever private enterprise is unable to prevent by itself the threat of economic instability or decline. Thirdly, the welfare state is committed to full employment as one of the top priorities of public policy. So, in the field of social security, protection against want, sickness, and old age is not only demanded by humanitarian considerations but can also be justified on economic grounds, since a minimum standard of living guaranteed by social security provides people with the minimum purchasing power, which is indispensable to the operation of industry in prosperity and depression. Okay, now collective bargaining between labor and management is another basic contribution towards a more stable and prosperous economy, because higher wages, provided they are based on higher productivity and not on organized extortion, create a bigger market for the products of industry and culture. Okay, so through the instrument of welfare, positive liberalism used the power of the state to modify the play of market forces in at least three directions. First one is by guaranteeing individuals and families a minimum income irrespective of the market values of their work or property. Second one is by narrowing the content of insecurity by enabling individuals and families to meet certain social contingencies such as sickness, old age and unemployment. And third one is by ensuring that all citizens without distinction of status or class are offered the best available agreed range of social services. The distinguished characteristics of the welfare state is the assumption by the community, acting through the state of the responsibility of providing the means whereby all its members can reach minimum standard of health, economy and civilized living and can share according to their capacity in its social and cultural heritage. Okay, now welfare state is a positive state. The underlying assumption behind the welfare state is that the state is not a necessary evil, but a desirable institution capable of promoting positive good. Whereas the laissez-faire liberalism contended that the government can advance the common interest by leaving the individual alone into the free and unrestricted play of natural forces. The exponents of welfare state argued that the state could best promote the general welfare by a positive exercise of its powers. Now, welfare state believes in a mixed economy. A welfare state operates within the framework of the market economy, that is, the capitalist mode of production. However, unlike the laissez-faire capitalist economy, the welfare state believes that unrestricted operation of the market has proved dangerous for the individual because it led to poverty, ignorance, illiteracy, etc. As well as for the economy because it led to booms, depressions, crises, leading to waste and inefficiency. The welfare state does not want to eliminate the market based economy but to streamline it in a manner where it could realize productive potentials by preventing crisis. The welfare state believes that poverty, dependencies, and economic insecurity are not the consciousness of nature and incompetence on the part of the poor, but result from changeable institutions of society. For the first time in history, modern technology has made it possible to banish poverty from the face of earth. The economic and other insecurities are caused by social forces and could be avoided by purposeful social action. Economic insecurity stems from inadequate compensation, disabilities incurred through accident, ill health, old age, etc. Unemployment. The welfare state believes that these insecurities can be overcome by remodeling the laissez-faire economy and by introducing a form of planning to realize these objectives. But planning should be combined with the market economy in various degrees. In other words, it would rectify the evils of the capitalist system by state intervention. It stands for what is now popularly known as mixed economy or a managed economy. Now, welfare state is a permanent institution of society and a neutral agency. You know, right? The welfare state positive liberalism maintains is an eternal and permanent institution of society. The state is also a neutral instrument of power which can be used for any purpose. The state is an arbiter seeking the good of any society impartially. The ability of the state to provide quantity, quality, and the type of welfare depends upon the group who wield the state power. The personnel of the government could be changed by the will of the people through universal suffrage. The state does not belong to a particular class. It tries to intervene in the economy positively and reshape it in such a manner that a minimum of social living is created for all the citizens, irrespective of the status and class position of citizens in the society. So, in short, positive liberalism consider welfare state as a new kind of state, which is democratic, in form which, though considering profit-oriented market economy as desirable, seeks to regulate or streamline it to serve social needs and thereby provide social welfare to the citizens. It is a state which has evolved from the laissez-faire state by a process of increased interference in the operation of the market economy at various levels and by gradually regulating the power of capital. Now come to the next topic, which is justification of the welfare state. So basically the emergence of case of the welfare state began with the argument that instead of public welfare being the cause of dependence, loss of autonomy and capacity for individual responsibility for action, and the market as a source of independence and freedom, the opposite is a case. The advocates of live welfare state argued that the individual has no control over his destiny in the context of impersonal market forces. The market system is unpredictable for some groups. That is, if people cannot be held responsible for their life, the foundations for welfare had to be quite different from those associated with classical liberalism. Historically, a major factor in the development of the welfare state was the growing mass unemployment during the interwar period in the Western world and the assumption that only the government could alleviate it. It was acceptance of the theory that distribution was not simply the distribution of income, but redistribution of resources according to ethical criteria such as need, desert, and so on, and even equally for its own sake. Social welfare was associated with social justice. Now let's take an example. In Britain, the Beveridge report in 1942 identified five major categories of sufferings: want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. The establishment, the foundation of the welfare state, taken with the national macroeconomic policies, the idea of welfare had become completely associated with the social philosophy designed not to replace the market but to correct it. The birth of the modern theory of welfare depended on the reinterpretation of certain key political concepts, notably liberty, equality, and justice. The net effect was to transform the nature of society from a conception of loosely associated individuals into a more intimate form of community. It was argued that if people could be held together by social bonds that transcended contractual relationships, then they could make claims on each other as citizens of a common enterprise, which could exceed their contribution as measured in more calculative economic terms. So basically, state welfare was regarded not as an act of charity but a form of entitlement. Simultaneously, the idea of welfare also developed outside the economic sphere. In spite of the fact that the idea of the welfare state became a constant view in the post-war period, there was no agreement within liberalism about the theoretical justification for the welfare state. Different scholars gave different justifications for the welfare state, such as to correct the ill effects of free trade capitalism, to enhance the liberty of the individual, to bring about an equalitarian society, to establish justice, which of course included social justice, to implement the citizenship rights, etc. Apart from these, there were also moral and altruistic justification. Let us have a brief look at some of them. First, state and the market. In the literature on social welfare, a dichotomy between the state and the market shown. The main criticism against free trade capitalism was that it leads to monopoly capitalism, and an economy dominated by the power of trust combines multinationals and transnational corporations. Right? So, as Titmus said, capital is biological failure. It is promoting the extinction of the society. Though he did not reject the market, he maintained that it is the cause of those economic misfortunes that render some people in need of welfare. Okay, now individualistic. A sophisticated moral justification for the welfare state was based on individualist grounds. It believes that the market forces do cause distress and hence undermine the notion of individual autonomy. This is inconsistent with the liberal belief in the equal autonomy of each individual and hence to restrain from aiding a person in deprivation where such action is not excessively costly is morally harming that person. In other words, welfare is not an act of morality but a compelling duty. Okay. Similarly, Raman Plant argues that basic needs have to be satisfied to do anything at all. What makes need objective is that they are a necessary means to the achievement of moral autonomy. Again, whereas wants cannot form the basis of a strict claim on others, needs can. This is because what makes need satisfaction of overriding importance is that the failure to provide for it is morally equivalent to harming someone. Now let's talk about the equality. Along with liberty, the social philosophy of welfare has been concerned with equality itself, not the justification in rational terms of socially and economically necessary inequalities or the identification and elimination of objective needs for its own sake. What R.H. Tawney called the religion of inequality has been a constant source of criticism from welfare philosophers. However, the liberal welfare philosophy has never advocated an uncompromising egalitarianism but a system in which those legal and political equalities that classical liberals had always valued are reflected in the economic world to a far greater extent than is possible in the capitalist market system. Equality has a potent value in welfareism. It is argued that the virtues of exchange relationship are badly compromised if the participants in them are separated by gross disparities of wealth. Since in the capitalist societies, some extracts to the market will start with an advantage for which perhaps no rational justification can be given. This inequality which be reflected in the outcome and the results itself. The market, instead of being an arena of expanding opportunities, will become a source of inequalities. There is a persistent question: why should the value of equality have the significance is traditionally had in the philosophy of welfare? This is because all societies seem to exhibit pretty regular inegalitarian features which seem more or less impervious to significant correction by political methods. Okay, modern legal and political inequalities are not accompanied by economic equality. Wealth can buy political power in defense of merely formal equal rules for the liberal system. Alright, now we will talk about the rights. Some theories have justified the welfare state in the context of rights. According to H.L.A. Hart, rights imply a special congruity in the use of force or threat of force to secure that what is just or fair or someone's right to have done shall in fact be done. It is only in these circumstances that coercion of another human being is legitimate. If there are any welfare rights, then it can only be so if coercion can be justified in the redistribution of resources and their position necessities. So welfare is not justified in terms of benevolence but is feature of entitlement or justice. However, this could have two implications for the welfare theory. Welfare rights would be systematical with the familiar negative rights. It would provide that very existence of welfare rights enforceable as law encourages people to adjust their behavior accordingly. That's become welfare rights claimants. Alright? Now, justice. Apart from the above justification in contemporary political theory, justice has become almost inextricably bound up with welfare. As you know, John Rawls in his book A Theory of Justice insists that justice is the first virtue of a society and that it should always take priority over other goods which may be interpreted in the welfare sense. Yet his concept of justice is a welfarist concept, one specifically concerned with the legitimization of a distribution of resources and with levels of well-being. Indeed, despite its individualistic methodology, it is a normative theory that poses welfare functions for society differing in substance but not in principle from other welfare functions such as utilitarian ones. Right? Now, welfare state contemporary debate. The welfare state seems a compromise between the market model of classical liberalism and contemporary libertarianism. It combines the capitalist freedom and inequalities with social equalities. It wants to achieve the best practical realization of the demands of liberty, equality, and justice. It retains the essential of the capitalist system while removing its attendant abuses. However, in spite of great claims, the concept of welfare state has raised many questions. The contemporary debate in Western societies has almost been about the welfare state and the crisis in the welfare philosophy, particularly after the slowdown in the economic growth. In the 1970s, the theory of welfare state believed that the mixed economy would generate level of national income sufficient to finance the welfare services and was justified on ethical grounds. That the primary aim of the welfare philosophers were redistributive, that is, the common provision for education, health, unemployment, insurance, etc., which would bring equality and relief from deprivation, and that the welfare state would generate a form of citizenship that would soften the acquisitive and non altruistic attitude which was prevalent in the market society. But the questions are, does it ensure the citizens the necessary income to fight insecurities and enable them to ensure a stable, dignified, and civilized life? Does it remove the inequalities of real income by adopting measures to redistribute income between the rich and the poor and by preventing the concentration of wealth in a few hands? So basically, according to Barry, the assimilation of the welfare theory with the philosophy of welfare state was an intellectual error. The theoretical mistake was the construction of a social philosophy that basically virtually ignored those welfare enhancing properties of the market system that had been stressed by earlier liberal political economists. As a result, there has been an inexorable expansion of the welfare state, with the result that the welfare state has mutated from a system designed to protect the vulnerable from the random effects of market forces to a comprehensive set of social arrangements which had only a contingent connection with the original purpose of interventionism. Throughout the 20th century, there was a sort of conscience about the necessity for some sort of state welfare because of the realization that there are certain genuine collective welfare. Okay, ends which could not be met through voluntary action. What is important about the contemporary attack on the welfare state is that because welfare involves coercion, it reduces freedom. The libertarian philosophers like Nozick do not approve of the idea of the welfare state. They defend the market economy and hold that the distributive policies of the state in the name of welfare violate people's rights. They do not agree with Rawls that talents or skills of the individuals are the common asset of society and the individuals are entitled to the fruits of their talents so long as they improve the conditions of the least advantaged section of society. It is nothing short of seizing one's labor and a fundamental attack on the sovereignty of the individual. Again, too much role to the state can lead to increasing bureaucracy, increasing decline of freedom, and may result in inefficiency. It represents a violation of the rights of those who are taxed to provide funding for the poor. According to Berry, although the terms in which Nozick writes that is the invocation of absolute and inviolable individual rights puts him outside the contemporary debate. His rigorous individualism and anti-statism alerted social theorists to the possibility that many welfare goals could be satisfied outside the formal apparatus of government. Since his criticism of the state is that it leads to coercion, there is a theoretical possibility that voluntary activity outside the price mechanism could solve at least some of today's welfare problems. Okay, the experience of post-war and basically the unexpected expansion of these services and the huge share of GNP absorbed by them have led to serious criticisms from both the left and the right. Okay. The critics of citizenship theory also maintain that the ideal of citizenship does grant individuals a claim of the resources of the community, but that it must be accompanied by corresponding social duties. Okay. Now let's take an assessment. The 1990s have witnessed the real setback to the welfare state. The underlying problem has been financial. It was argued that the welfare states are expensive as the average age of population increases, so the total cost of welfare services such as medical care, pensions, education also increase, whereas the working population which shoulders the burden declines in number. Thus, the demand on the welfare state increases when the supply is low. For example, when unemployment goes up, the expenditure on unemployment pay also increases, but the tax collected from the workers goes down. Thus, the recession of 1980s caused many doubts with regard to the welfare programs. Again, the international pressures also matter. If the cost of welfare in one state is higher than the other, the economy loses its international competitiveness, as Pearson has pointed out. Like move to a more open international economy has curtailed opportunities for further development of the national welfare state. And lastly, the impact of welfare on their willingness to work is also a problem confronting the welfare state. If people are assured of pay and other benefits, they do not work, and it affects those who have to give a substantial amount of their earnings in tax deductions in order to pay for the welfare benefits. In many countries, public support for the welfare state has declined very sharply. Thus, in the present crisis of the welfare state, in the major point of debate is whether the state is an agency of redistribution of wealth and services from the rich to the poor, or should it only provide a safety net, establishing a minimum level of welfare beneath which no one would be allowed to fall. The present trend favors only a safety net. Alright? So, guys, welfare state was a result of the transformation of classical liberalism into positive liberalism in the 20th century. A thoroughgoing revision of liberal theory required a re examination of the nature of functions of the state, the nature of liberty, equality, justice, the relationship between liberty and legal coercion. Alright, instead of the state being regarded as a necessary evil, positive liberalism considered the state as a positive good, an agency of individual and social welfare, and a guardian of the common interest of society. Okay. So guys, that's all for today. I hope you understand all the points clearly. So if you have any doubt, feel free to ask any question to me. And if you like my video, kindly hit the like button. Do subscribe my YouTube channel for more videos. See you in the next video. Till then, bye bye. Take care.